Welcome to Work World Writing. When I ask my students to step up their writing game, they usually start complaining. And then I bring in a guest speaker, and the conversation goes something like this.
We shall double our efforts.
I hope so for your sake. The Emperor is not as forgiving as I am.
Today we're going to look at what kind of writing a student should produce. And the reason why we're looking at this is because this is what a student asked me one day in class. The answer I wanted to give them, what kind of writing are we going to produce, was good writing, a correct writing, a persuasive writing, logical writing. But what the student meant was, are we going to do essays or poems or short stories or letters or reports or articles and things like that? And I thought that's a really good question. And because I base writing on the work world, I sort of turned it back to the students and said, well, when you get out into the real world, into the work world, what kind of writing are these people going to produce? People that work in industry, and doctors and nurses, and if maybe you're a musician or you're a reporter or something, what kind of writing do real people in the real world produce? And so then we started, based on that, to look at the types of writings we see in school: essays and reports and short stories and letters and poems and articles and memoirs. Those are some that we could list off. And so we started picking each one of them one by one. And so we started with essays, and I went and found this diagram to help somebody form an essay. To be honest, structuring your writing based on some kind of a form like this, where you have to have 3 reasons here or you have to have 3 details, they're incredibly frustrating to try and create sentences that have to fit into this form. I think essays are a terrible idea. They're a terrible way to teach writing. They're not realistic. Essays don't exist in the real world at all. They're a school thing, and they just usually create more problems than they do any good when it comes to learning to write better. So most of these people here, carpenters and musicians and nurses and people that write in the real world, they don't do essays, so I don't use them in class at all. And then we go through reports, and sure, some of these people might create a report. Probably not many of them are going to write a short story unless that's their career. Yes, probably they're going to produce letters, poems, maybe as a hobby on the side. And so eventually we'll come up with our list, and we'll narrow it down. We're going to do a lot of articles, persuasive articles, and some letters, maybe some emails. I don't have emails on here. Emails, and maybe a few kind of report ideas. But that's the kind of writing we're going to produce. Another challenge we face is finding good samples of these writings. When I think about the work world and all the people that might be reading the writing that I produce, I need to find good samples of this so that I can show my students those samples. And so I get my students to think about their audience, and I start to ask them, how old would the people be that might read your writing once you're out in the work world? And eventually, after a time, we'll realize, well, we could have a customer that's quite young and a customer that's quite old. And so sometimes the writing we produce, let's say something we put on our website, or maybe emails that we send out, or letters that we send out to all of our customers, there's a chance that we have a very broad customer base. So I want to find samples of writing that target this large customer base, and that's how I want to write as well. Eventually we realize that we're going to be using magazines. National Geographic, this magazine is written for a very large audience. Psychology Today, maybe a little bit older audience. I got Newsweek. Newspapers are written for a very broad audience, so that's a good sample of the kind of writing I want to produce. Mental Floss is a fun magazine that we use in class a lot. There's a Wall Street Journal we've used, Time Magazine, Canadian magazines, because I live in Canada here. Maclean's is a great one. And I also use my local newspaper. There's a letter here, a government letter. I try to use samples of those as well. And even websites that are, again, geared for a very large audience. We'll look at the writing on there, and then I'll probably end off with samples of my own writing, trying to address sort of a wide readership. And so that's the kind of writing that we're going to be interested in when we're talking about work world writing. I want real world writing sources that are written for a wide audience, and avoid some of those school type documents, and focus on articles, letters, emails, maybe the odd report. Anyway, thanks for listening.